Happy everybody, and welcome to our first virtual kickback. Everybody, welcome. We're going to go around and introduce ourselves to everybody out there. And for everyone who is joining us online, it is essential that you introduce yourself too. Tell us who you are and what you do, what you teach, what your career path may be. You may be a parent joining somebody out there. Kind of let us know who you are and what's going on. So with that being said, I'm Zach Kirk, and it's a great pleasure to be here. I'm going to put you on, Dante.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dante Tates. I am currently English teacher and department chair at Westover School in Middlebury, Connecticut. It's a boarding day school of about 200 all girls, and it's pretty awesome.
Wow. Kathleen.
Hey, everybody. Good evening, and thank you for joining us this Friday night. My name is Kathleen, and I am a English supervisor, grades 9 through 12 at a large high school in Central Jersey. But at the heart of everything, I consider myself a teacher activist. So thank you for joining us tonight.
Very good. Chris, you're man. Let me roll you onto the big screen.
All right. Hello, everyone. I am Chris Bronke. My actual professional role is as an English department chair outside of Chicago. So in that position, I get to teach one class a day, which is the highlight. And then I oversee a department of 22 English teachers as their full-time administrator. And then just a little plug, several of us are here tonight because of the Conference on English Leadership. So if you are a literacy leader and looking for a home, please feel free to reach out to me or several of other people on this call. I'm the chair of that organization, and we'd love to welcome you to our space. So Zach, thanks for having us, and cheers to everyone who's watching.
And Emily, take it away.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Emily Meixner. I am a teacher educator and the coordinator of the secondary English education program at the College of New Jersey in Ewing, New Jersey. I was a high school teacher, and then I was a graduate student for a long time, and now I work with students who want to be middle school and high school teachers, and I'm so excited to be a part of this conversation tonight. So, Zach, thank you for the invite, and thank you for being the host.
It is a pleasure, and we are happy to also introduce our featured speaker, the one and only Tam Russell.
Hi, everybody. My name is Tamara Russell. I teach third grade in Central Florida. I am a national board middle childhood generalist, and I love all things literacy and literacy integration, and I'm really excited to be here. I'm also a union organizer and the committee chair for the Racial and Social Justice Committee. So I'm thrilled to be here amongst such fabulous, fabulous people. Thank you, Zach, for the invitation.
So we have my good friend, Stacey Arrington. Stacey is an educator here in Atlanta at a phenomenal school, high-performing school, and he put a heart, TCNJ. So who can tell me what that means? Because I don't know what that means.
That's where I work. That's the college where I'm the coordinator of the English education program. So go Lions, TCNJ love. So happy to have another TCNJ person here on the call.
The TCNJ love is there. Shout out, you got fans, Kathleen. You have some fans here with us. So we're going to just kind of jump right into it. So we hope everyone has had a good week, a productive week. I know for all of my educator friends who are in Georgia, for some of them, it's been a stressful week. In Georgia, COVID-19 has continued to decline. We have one of the lowest vaccination rates in the country. Teachers in the state of Georgia are not allowed to get vaccinated at the moment. We had one county actually give teachers vaccines, and now they're being punished with the 6-month moratorium on receiving vaccines. So now that's their punishment from our governor, the one and only Brian Kemp. So I know that everyone needs a space just to decompress, relax. We hope that you're doing that you are kicking back, that you will learn a little bit something here for next week as well, with perhaps your favorite beverage or libation in hand. Tonight's focus and our topic is teaching Black history in context. And this topic was picked because, one, next week begins Black History Month. And a lot of educators who really care about doing and who care about kids, guys, they want to get it right. They want to do a good job of teaching Black history and context. A lot of people are now kind of, going back into their buildings or really revving up and getting the hang of simultaneous teaching, synchronous or asynchronous, or whatever you want to call it. But they're looking for resources all over the place. This was kind of spotty when I saw this posted online. And now let me preface by saying I am not saying there's anything wrong with these lesson plans. There may be amazing things out there, but I can't validate them or to what extent they were curated. So that kind of spurred me to come together and say, let me think of what we can have around a panel and we can all share, not only us, but our viewers who are with us. What are some things that we can really do to teach Black history context? I'm going to start off with a question. And that question is this, how have you responded as an educator to the current change in our nation's social climate around race and equity? Basically, how is this year different for you than previous years? How have you adjusted to that year? And that's not only for our panelists, also for those of you who are out there with us. And if while you're watching, you have a question, don't hold back. Feel free to ask. And I'm opening it up to the floor. Anyone can take it.
I'll jump in. Hi, everyone. I think at the end of the day, one of the things I'm starting to notice very clearly is that this is a very actually good time in our history. Sometimes when things are at their darkest, there's that quote from Martin Luther King about seeing the light in the darkest moment and seeing the stars. And, I just think there's so many stars right now out there. And I think I see that in the resources that I'm picking as I'm now beginning to actually tackle using the word supremacy in the classroom. And what does supremacy mean? And dominance and those ideas. And I'm tackling them when it comes to whiteness, but also when it comes to maleness and other things as well. But particularly when it comes to whiteness, in that we are at a moment where we've really got to witness kind of history in the making with what white supremacy does to this country. That history of, rioting. And there's so many good things coming out, seeing us build a transition out of a moment of absolute chaos. That has been really important. And for educators, I think it's super key right now that we tap into all these resources. We tap into the historical moment. I used right in my class. My first class I opened with was Literature, Culture, and Identity in the United States this semester. And the first thing I started off with was Amanda Gorman's poem, her inaugural poem. I started with that because I wanted to have the conversation about the fact that supremacist culture comes from the idea that people don't want to climb anymore that hill. They want to believe that they can sit on top of the hill, like that hill upon the city. We know that Boston myth we tell ourselves about ourselves, that beacon upon a hill. We have to let that go. We have to recognize and begin to think about the fact that everyone has to make that climb, and that climb needs to be equitable. It needs to be done together. And I think that if we start with the right resources and we use the current moment, we can actually have real conversations in the classroom.
All right, I can jump in. So part of what am I unmuted? Yes. Part of what I was thinking about actually is, so I do teach a class called Race and Gender in Literature at my school. And it's a class that I specifically created so that we can study the perpetuation of racial and gender identities through literature. And I also thought this week about Angela Davis and how she said that, I think the quote exactly is about how you have to approach every day, you have to act as if it were possible to radically transform the world. And you have to do it all the time. You have to think like that all the time. So my approach to education is one where my teachers and myself, we need to approach education as transformational. It's not just the transfer of content. It isn't just, learning grammar, but it's really bringing that critical engagement into the classroom and having students question these hierarchies that they're seeing, these power structures that they're seeing. And you can use it in so many different ways, right? It's not just about reading a book and discussing it that way, but we looked at images. We looked at the images from the Capitol event, the Capitol Hill event. And we asked them, what do you see? Point out something that really resonates with you. What question does that bring to mind? and having them question everything themselves. Like, it's not about me feeding them what I think, but really having them look at it. And really, you know, whenever something like this happens, we say, this is not who we are, right? But this is who we are. Kind of like Dante said, we have this history of angry mobs, right? Waving flags and attacking buildings and peoples and towns. And we need to confront that history, right? When you talk about history and context, we need to confront that history, that this is who we are. And where do we go from here? How do we move from here? From this constant reaction, this, I guess, this decline into violence, right? So having my students critically look at that and connect it to past events that mimic exactly what they saw on the screen has been really vital in having them understand that history has gotten us here, and we need to unravel that history and really understand it in order to move forward in transformation.
I think both of you have said some really powerful bites in there. So I want to know, Dante, just giving us, you know, what's the demographic of what are your demographics like in your classroom? You're all female.
So yes, it's all female. The demographics are actually interesting. We have about maybe a good 70% who are U.S. students of color. We have about a good 30% who are international students. So we draw a lot of international students all the way from Kinshasa to Kigali to Guangzhou, all over the world. We're drawing kids in. I think that one of the beautiful things about our school is that with this, we do have still dominantly white students. It's white. There's a certain level of affluence there. I'm not going to deny that. And yet within that space of creating a school for all girls, there's an absolute subversion of all that. There's a willingness to push against that is very unusual in probably a mixed school or a co-ed school or in an all-boys school, because by virtue of it being defined for women, there is this desire to fight up against, you know, the patriarchy that exists within a culture and society. Now, don't get me wrong. We still got to grapple with lots of those issues within that. There's white feminism that's afoot sometimes and can get a little out of hand. And we have to remember our intersectionality. Don't get me wrong. Yet and still, though, there is such a willingness to dive deep. Imagine if we were starting the conversation instead of with George Washington, with actually Betsy Ross and Sojourner Truth. And imagine if we start the conversation with Hillary instead of Bill. Like, that's where we are at our school. So that's why the conversation looks a little elevated, even though we have our problems.
And so and I want everyone to jump in with questions that you have, because it kind of, you know, we want to push the conversation further. Here's the thing. That's an ideal scenario for forward-thinking pedagogy in a lot of places, right? But what if you were in a that was 90% white, and you had classrooms that were not only 90% white, but let's say it was a 90% white classroom, and it was an all boys school. How would that impact your curricular decisions, if at all?
I mean, I can chime in there. Zach, I think you were saying, you said 90% white, right? Is that what you were saying? Right?
Yes.
Yeah. So, you know, I was glad that you asked me to join this. At first I was, you know, hesitant, you know, being a white male, you know, and having the privilege that I do, but I also realized, Zach, that like I lead a department that is in a district similar to that. We're not 90% white, but we're probably about at the school in which I work, about 80%, probably somewhere in that range. And, you know, while the work that I'm trying to lead is far from perfect, I think it's important to talk about that work, because, you know, at times, you know, you could argue that it's needed in that district maybe more than any others. And so when I think about, like, you know, to that question, you know, one of the things that I think is starting to happen, which is, you know, I've been in this role for 9 years now. And what I have seen in how the students, specifically the white students themselves, in this, you know, predominantly white district, are the ones pushing for a more equitable and inclusive curriculum is incredible. I don't know necessarily where the Board of Ed might sit on some of these things. And I know that I've had to deal with some parent challenges about this, that, and the other. But it's the students who are saying, like, we want to read more Black literature. We want to read more, LGBTQIA plus, authors or themes. Actually this summer, this was a super proud moment for being in the district in which I am. After the George Floyd murder, there was a group of alum from the district in which I work who actually wrote a letter to the board, basically charging us all with, pushing things forward to be a more equitable and inclusive curriculum. And, one of the things that I like to talk about is, I think as a whole, and I'll speak for the department that I lead specifically, we've done a decent job over the years that I was there. And this is both like we've done a decent job, but also I've not done a good enough job of bringing in, texts from minoritized authors, but we've brought them in a way where they are typically speaking, not always, but typically speaking, the supplemental text. And not the core text, not the primary text. And so what we've started to talk about is, we do have, to use like the seed terms, like we've got those windows and mirrors, but how big are those windows and mirrors, and how big should they be? And that's kind of the work that we're trying to do right now. And it's fun to see how the students are the ones kind of pushing on us as leaders to try and make that happen.
Chris, your comments were making me think of a couple of things with respect to teacher education, because that's the population of students that I work with, and they're primarily white, based on the demographics of the college that I work at. We're a primarily white institution, but there is a hunger, right, for knowledge about texts with which my students are unfamiliar, so that when they go into classrooms, they're better prepared to talk about a wide range of authors. Many, simply just haven't had the experience reading enough in their middle school and high school classrooms to know where to go, to know who to read, to know what to look at. And so a lot of the time, at least in the teacher education classes that I work with in English, is spent just introducing authors of various different kinds of backgrounds, of various different geographies, of various different language communities. And we've also been thinking about, at least in my program, about two different things. One, sort of thinking about how do we teach the history of literacy, and what does that have to do with English language arts instruction? We talk about English as if it's always been taught in the same way, and if it always has meant, literacy has always meant the same thing to the same groups of people, but that's not actually historically true. And so when we think for example, about Goldie Muhammad's work talking about Black literary societies, that becomes really important to thinking about the kind of critical work that English language arts classrooms, can do. And also sort of thinking currently about April Baker Bell's work on linguistic justice. Those are kinds of conversations that we need to be having in the teacher education classes, in my classes, right? So that by the time they get to you, right, as an English teacher, and you're working with them as a department chair, they have all of this knowledge and all of these rich resources of these different kinds of linguistic and literacy histories. So what you were saying kind of hit home for me, thinking about what it is that my teacher education students want, but also what they need and what they're going to need going forward, particularly right in this cultural moment.
And Tam, I'm coming to you next, because Emily hit on, and she talked about middle and high school text. We both know the value and the importance of some elementary text that's just foundational. But Emily, this is a question from one of our viewers. They want to know, how do you help your students see their own bias or understand if they have a bias?
So I think that there are a number of different strategies, and thankfully, it's not just my classes. I'm working with a whole program of people who are interested in doing this kind of work. And I think it begins by sort of looking at what our histories have been. What are the narratives, the primary narratives that we've encountered in our schooling? What do we believe about what good students look like and do? What good readers look like and do? What good literature is? What standardized language looks and sounds like. And so to begin by questioning all of those things, and then to try and figure out, have those things actually been privileged in schools? Do they need to continue to be privileged in schools? So that's where we start, kind of looking deeply at our own histories and our own trajectories, and the ways in which that has in some ways empowered and privileged a lot of the students that I currently have in my teacher education program.
Yeah, Zach, can I chime in just for 2 seconds? I'm sorry, Tamara. Like this is like it's such a poignant piece, and it connects to the CEL work that we were doing. Cornelius Minor did some work as a speaker for CEL at the NCTE convention this past fall, and one of the activities he had participants doing, which is pursuant to this point, and I think kind of ties this all together, is especially if you're leading this work, ask your staff how they learned what normal meant. And that question is such a unthreatening way to start to think about where our biases may have come from, or realize that we have them. So for a tangible takeaway for those of you who are out there, especially if you're leading any of this work, something to think about.
I think that's a powerful statement. Cornelius has done some amazing research and has some great stuff. So if you Google Cornelius Minor and then put in ASCD, you will see some of his work that's been published around these topics that's really, really good. So I want everyone to think about a critical and essential text, both for students and for teachers in this work. Think of a critical text, though just one, got to boil down to one. A text for teachers and a text for students. And we're going to share that in a moment. But while we get ready to do that, I'm going to turn it over to Tam. You tell us that elementary perspective in this work, because if we wait until secondary, we've waited too long.
I would definitely agree with that. So when you asked before about how this has changed the way that I teach, particularly Black cultural studies in third grade, because that's what I teach. I have taught all year long. So Black History Month is not really a month. It's actually a trajectory for me. And I know that that's kind of different for some teachers that are emerging, particularly elementary school teachers emerging into this work. But I think when you teach elementary, this is just my perspective, you need to start to help kids understand the whole before they can understand the parts. So one of the things that's changed for me is that I'm teaching the students about, my theme this year, my entire year has been liberation is collective. It's that in my union work this year, and it's also that in my classroom. Liberation is collective. And so every time I teach my students about something historically oppressive, we look for the people who are doing collective work, and what does that look like? Because I'm asking my students to look for models so that they can now pursue these models in their own justice work as we're living out that calling through different things that we're doing in our classroom.
And Tam, this is third grade.
This is third grade. Yeah.
This is third grade. I want everyone out there to know this is a third grade. This is third grade work. And so, but now not everybody out there, hey, Keisha, not everybody out there understands what you're saying. Break it down even further. What do you mean?
Okay. Oh, and I'll also say, Zach, I have 50% of my students are white. 50% of my students are white, and I teach in a rural area. So this is not some suburb that's, hey, there's Fran. I love Fran. Sorry, I got really excited there. So 50% of my students are white. And that's something else. You talked a little bit tangentially about the pandemic. That's something that we haven't really mentioned. A lot of our students coming back to schools right now are white. My school demo is 60% BIPOC students. My classroom is 50% white. So not all the students that I had anticipated coming back came back, but I still determined I was going to teach the same things. So for just an example, one quick one. When we studied voting rights in October. I collected several different trade books for students where we read different things about voting rights. I collected different articles. I made in my Google Classroom, I'm teaching face-to-face because I'm in Florida. In my Google Classroom, I made a timeline for my students about voting rights, when different groups of people got their rights. And then students in my classroom were able to choose a group that they wanted to pursue more learning on. So my favorite group this year was my girls group that was looking at voting rights for women. They were so turned up for 8- and 9-year-old girls. I mean, they were like, and the women fought, Miss Russell, and they did it. They protested and they really got into it. So that was exciting. So that's something that's been up on my wall all year long. The students then transfer that learning with their own drawings and things. We put that on the wall. And now I refer to that timeline all year long. So that's just one thing that I've done this year. that's helping my students see the systemic, not systemic, that's the wrong word, but helping my students see that this is a lifelong struggle for this country, that we've been engaged in this work. A second thing that I've done, because I told you I love integration, is that I've been teaching my students the history of where math comes from. We've been integrating more of the learning of what different people groups brought us the types of math that we're learning. And I try to bring my math instruction into my literacy block as often as I can. So just a short, quick example, we talked about the Montgomery bus boycott this last week, and my students and I did some math around why boycotts work. And we actually did a physical model where my students, we set up as like the bus was in our classroom made up of chairs, and each student had $1 and we tallied it up, and then we did the multiplication to figure out how much it was. And then we just talked about that as a singular bus. And then I had my students boycott. And we talked about that. And then they did the math again so they could see the difference in the money. And we talked about how money and power corrupts certain situations and it gives a power imbalance. This is, like I said, it's third grade. My kids were engaged and they did the work. And now so many of my students are starting to take on that identity of activists, which really makes me excited for what their forward progress is going to look like. So those are just a couple ideas.
So I want to open the floor, and I mean that's huge, right? I mean, so often I think I always want to include, an elementary expert here, because again, this work starts so young. It has to, and that's something I think a lot of times we, myself included, as a secondary educator, we may miss that. What I want to know, going to open the questions out there. I want you to ask the questions, but I want to know, Tam, this: have you gotten pushback from the parents? And if you haven't gotten pushback from the parents, how did you bring those parents on board? Because you have a lot of parents at that age who will say, this is too heavy for my child. I don't want my child to know about these. Even when you're well-meaning, you may have a parent who say, I don't want my child to know about racism in third grade. I don't want my child to know about the fact that women were discriminated against and didn't have equal rights in the third grade. I want to know how you were able to lay that foundation down.
I have had some pushback this year. I think it's because there are a lot of parents that are, concerned about the things that are going on globally, right? And so you have parents that think that elementary is a place to protect students. So they think in not sharing things, they're protecting students. One of the things I feel like in my benefit, and I only have this one career to live by, but I've taught for a really long time. And I do know how to align the things that I'm teaching students to standards. I can defend the work that I'm doing. This is not out of pocket. Like third grade students are supposed to be studying about how we vote. Third grade students are supposed to be learning about the different phases of government, right? They're supposed to be learning those things. Those are skills that are on par for third grade. So I think it would be different if I taught maybe middle school or high school, in the sense that there are a lot more things that teachers of older students can do, particularly encouraging activism outside of school, that I wouldn't be able to do, right? Because my students don't have transportation. They wouldn't be able to walk to a specific location and march. They wouldn't be able to demonstrate with me at a specific location because they're only 8 years old. But there are things that we can talk about in the classroom that they get excited about, that is part of the core curriculum. Again, this is all aligned to the standards that students are supposed to be learning in Florida. So it's not, I think the difference in the way that I may teach it is the types of resources that I bring to the classroom. So I'm centering Black and BIPOC voices in my classroom, whereas that may not be happening in another classroom. So all 6 of us might be teaching voting rights, but I'm centering Black voices when I do that. Does that make sense?
It feels like such an important piece, because I know, for my students, they sometimes get wrapped up in, I have to meet the standards. And there are 16 million different ways that you can do that. And so you need to be smart and judicious, right, and equitable when you're thinking about your choices. And if you really want to do activist work, then doing exactly what you're doing is, I put in the chat, I don't know if people can see it in the comments, but that was exactly the kind of work that I wanted my son to be doing when he was in third grade. And so if he had had teacher after teacher after teacher who was doing that, I would have been out of my mind with joy. But But yeah, I mean, like, don't get caught up in the standards. You can hit the standards, asking kids to think about lots of different kinds of texts, lots of different kinds of experiences, and writing your way into all kinds of statements of belief and passion and knowledge, right, that your kids are bringing to your classroom. So kudos. I wanted to kudos. I just love it.
And I would share it's the same at the high school level. You know, Tamara, like it's the same thing. Like here, we're a skill-based curriculum at the end of the day, and if you're covering the skills and you choose to do it with, you know, events and issues and topics that work for you in that respect, you know, that's you know, when I'm working with the teachers, I think that there is a sense of you know, with 23 teachers that I oversee, all of them are white except for one. And then, like I said, you know, about 80% of the student population is white. But every teacher in the department has a passion to do this work, but they're afraid of the backlash, right? Like, well, what's going to happen if I say the wrong word, or if I use the wrong phrase, or if someone just disagrees that this work needs to happen? And I say, well, you know, if we frame it around the skills, and you're just talking about writing argument, and you're not sharing your own political beliefs, it's a win-win for everyone, right? I mean, at the end of the day, I can defend that till the cows come home, and if I can't, then fire me as well. So, you know, I think that transcends the age group, but I think you know, I was going to say to Zach, like, I have a question. Like, I would like to join Tamara's classroom. Is that can I like zoom in and like hang out with your kids? Because I would love to do that. Like let's set something up.
Right. And Tamara, Tam, you need to be giving us some of those like model mini lessons, right? So we need to make that happen. You know, because I know you're back in Florida, right? Because, like, you know, yeah, your governor is one step above mine, but it's a baby step. It's a baby step. Well, you guys have more people at least you have 1 million people vaccinated. We have millions of vaccines on the shelves. So by the time I'm able to get vaccinated, I'll be getting the Johnson & Johnson baby oil version and maybe have a 66% chance of protection. So I want everybody out there who's watching to get your pens out, right? Or get something where you can write down these recommendations, because we're going to open the floor for the one book for students and the one book for teachers that people need to read. I'll start off giving you guys still a little bit more think time, right? So I will begin the breakdown. And so I'm going to say that for me, you know, everyone knows my background, you know, it's high school. I would say that the essential text that every student needs to read at what for me that I taught would probably be, it would have to be Beloved by Toni Morrison. Now, that's my choice. I know it's a tough choice. It's a controversial choice. I read the book for the first time when I was in 9th grade. And I read it, you know, it was given to me by an older student on a bus. She's an avid reader. She would pass books over to me. And I fell in love with the book. I fell in love with Toni Morrison. It was an instant love. And every year that I was in a classroom, I used that book as a vehicle for standards-based instruction with my 11th grade students. For on-grade level students, I took portions and passages and we read through the text. And then for my advanced placement students, they read the book on their own. And then we did work around the text in class. But that was my book, because for me, that book allowed me to truly understand the impact and the legacy of slavery on a human. And then for teachers, I would say the book that everyone has to read is Stamped from the Beginning by Dr. Ibram Kendi. Like, that is the book that I think every American period needs to read to really understand how racism has impacted America and how it impacts our decisions. And to me, those are the two texts that I would recommend. And your texts don't have to be lengthy text. They can be short text. It could be something, you know, letter from Birmingham jail, simple speech. It could be a number of things. So with that being said, whoever wants to go next can take it away.
Yeah, I don't think I have to think this long on this one. So I can jump in. I think for staff, it's White Rage by Carol Anderson. I think that it is this. I mean, for me, reading that, I was like, why wasn't this the book we used in my junior like U.S. history class? Like, quite frankly, you know, it was, you know, shocking. It was appalling. It was eye-opening. But I think for a staff read, especially if the staff, like, you know, where I work is 98% white or something like that, it kind of makes it, well, it I hope makes it impossible to argue with why we need to do this work. If you read that book and then still are saying, why do we need to do this work? I'm not sure I have an answer, unfortunately. In terms of students, and I think it depends, I'm high school, so it depends maybe on what grade level I'm at, but I'm currently teaching a senior comp class. So we're not reading a bunch of full-length stuff because it's mostly writing, but the excerpts that we are reading, the ones that I think need to bring in the most are from Between the World and Me. I think, Ta-Nehisi Coates. And I bring it in, and I don't know, maybe there would be, different opinions on this. And I think that would be awesome to hear. I actually bring it in as just a flat out mentor text, regardless of content. I sell it to the kids as this is some of the most brilliantly beautiful, actual stylistic writing that you will ever freaking read in your entire damn life. And then without realizing it, we're also talking about all of these really important race issues with a bunch of white kids. But for me, it's celebrating just what a brilliant writer he is. I would, read him writing a phone book in his own language, in his own style. So, trying to use that in this, this just celebratory way. And then also it opens up those conversations. So to me, that I love the question, Zach. And it was such a quick response for me personally.
Okay, I'll answer next, but this was a really hard question, Zach. I love professional reading. I'm like a professional reading head. That's what I like to do. That and romance novels. And I'm not going to give any of those suggestions on today because my mom is watching on YouTube. But I will tell you that this is my professional reading book that I would suggest, Teaching for Black Lives. This has so many great, because Zach was asking about ideas, teachers who just need ideas. I just want to see it. Can you tell me so I can live that out? Teaching for Black Lives has a lot of great ideas. Something else that's really shaped my pedagogical viewpoint in the last year and a half would be Dr. Goldie Muhammad's work. I think Emily referenced it earlier today. Now I can't remember the name of the book.
Cultivating Genius.
Cultivating Genius. I talk about that book a lot too. That's really shaped a lot of my thinking. Last book suggestion I would give, this is for all my elementary teacher friends. Unpack Your Impact by Lanisha Tab and Naomi O'Brien. These are two elementary school teachers. If y'all think I'm dope, come get this book from my friends because they teach kinder and first. And they're dope too. And they wrote this book just to tell teachers about how to do social studies the right way. So they're fantastic. So Unpack Your Impact by my friends Naomi and Lanisha. Those are my book suggestions.
So you tell your friends to get ready. We're going to have them for a Friday night kickback really soon because we need all this knowledge, right? So we need that. Who's next?
I'll go.
You want to go, Dante?
No, you go, Kathleen.
Thank you, Dante. So I'm going to do like Tam did. So my go-to is really Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed has guided me for so long, just understanding power structures and helping my students to understand power structures, but also using parts of it with my staff so that they can start looking at the way they're wielding power in the classroom. And I always tell them, are you honoring your students' dignity? Are you allowing their voice? Just making sure that they understand that the way that power structures are set up in the classroom often break down students. So Pedagogy of the Oppressed is really important to me, but also Teaching to Transgress by Bell Hooks. I'm a transgressor, so I love that book. And then just not even for teaching, but I'm going to say Caste by Isabel Wilkes. I mean, she is blowing my mind. I'm crying. It's breaking my heart. There's so much in that book that's heart-wrenching, heart-rending. But okay, so then that's my teachy stuff. And then if I had to hand a book over to my students, I would hand over Kindred by Octavia Butler. I feel as though she was a brilliant mind that before we even had a word for reimagining past and futures, she was doing it. Before we even knew what it was to dream of new realities and new places for Black students, she was doing. I mean, I just feel like she is underrated, often dismissed, but she is absolute genius. She is a speculative firebomb, and we need to have her in every classroom.
I read Octavia Butler and Samuel Delaney in high school as well. So both love them both. And you know what? Kiwi Kate is making some great points. Kiwi Kate, you know, I'm going to list. I'm 3+1 Media. That is me. And I'm going to go through, I'm going to list them right on this thread so that you will see that. And I'm also, you know what, this needs to be a book club. We need to have a book club. We need to be reading something together. It's coming. We're going to make it happen. Who's next?
I can jump in. This question is unfair because I just need to target the person specifically. And I have like at least 25 books for that one person. If I know more about them. So Zach, thank you for the challenge of this question. For me, right now, my faculty, my department's reading Letting Go of Literary Whiteness. This just came out in 2019. It's anti-racist literature instruction for white students. So I think realistically for Black History Month, you know what folks can give us in America? Give us some anti-racism. Get your people, white folks. Get them, gather them, and organize them for education so that they can get on this bandwagon of the reality is that we're not going to stand for white supremacy anymore. We're not going to stand for male supremacy. We're not going to stand for straight supremacy. It's just not going to happen. Our country's moving forward, and you need to get on that and educate yourself. And so I really highly recommend this to any teacher out there who's saying, oh, I teach these books, like I want to do this. And I recommend Disrupt Text with Trisha Abavia and Julia Torres, Downhouse Boots. Like they are on it. They are talking. If you are a high school English teacher and you are not bumping into them, you have not bumped into your new pedagogy for the 21st century. So please step in and please step up because we need you. We want you. And there's a lot to be done. Like there's a lot to be done and there's a lot to read and know before you start doing it. So get yourself educated. Snatch that. The other thing I would say for my children, it's really hard for me. But right now, I will say this. If I were to recommend anything for my children is to read more young adult literature. I feel like all the classics are really tearing them apart and really putting them in spaces that really they're not ready to go into. Like, I love it. But like Juliet Takes a Breath by Gabby Rivera, my gosh, snatches your soul. In his amazing work, Dante and Aristotle, you know, in that Text of the Universe, I can't remember the author's name right now, absolutely phenomenal. There's so much out there that is really in the young adult literature world that's doing all the work of equity, inclusion, justice. And the last I'm gonna throw out there is Bettina Love, Dr. Bettina L. Love, and we need to do more than survive. She is it. She knows what she's talking about. I am all behind abolitionist teaching because I'm tired of us just surviving in these white systems. It's time to abolish and dismantle, do the work that was not done in 1863.
Or 1776 by the 1776 Project. So we appreciate that. Dante, this is what we're gonna do. Dante, we're going to have you organize a book drive for Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, who represents the 14th Congressional District of Georgia. And because I'm gonna be fair. I'm gonna be fair. Done. She represents the state that I currently live in, but so come with the good. Alsop and Warnock came a little bad, Marjorie Taylor Greene, but we need to get her some books, about confronting her whiteness, and let's just see what happens. Also with the good, I want to say that Bettina Love as well as Gholdy Muhammad both live in Georgia as well. Bettina's at the University of Georgia and Goldie's at Georgia State University. I know her well, love them both. Okay, there we go. And so, Emily, what we got?
So I was going to go with Teaching to Transgress as my teacher choice. Every teacher needs to read that book. Every teacher needs to read that book. But then Kathleen also mentioned that one. I'm going to go also the Rethinking Schools route and just mention a couple of books by Linda Christensen. Teaching for Joy and Justice is one of them. She's got several other books, but there are some really, really, really wonderful essays. In those, and all of Rethinking Schools, all of their resources are really, really wonderful. So I would go Teaching to Transgress, and then the Rethinking Schools books. And then, so I'm going to come in with a middle grade book, just because I also teach courses in children's and young adult literature. And so I've heard the high school texts, and then we've got some texts for the little ones. But I'm going to go with Jacqueline Woodson's book, Harbor Me, which I really, really love. And it's told through the voice of a young girl, but she's also taping the stories of all of these other kids that she's in class with, who are going through lots of different things. And so it talks and tackles racism. It talks about deportation. It talks about mass incarceration. It talks about language bias. It talks about bullying. There are just so many rich, age-appropriate conversations that are happening between the kids in that book that are really, really, I think, important for us to be thinking about as teachers, and thinking about how kids talk about these things, but also to have kids reading and talking about them in their classes. So Jacqueline Woodson's book, Harbor Me, is the one that I'll suggest.
Thank you to everybody. And I captured, I think, a good list. So I'm going to email you guys to make sure my list is right, and then we're going to post it here, and then we're going to start a process of really capturing everybody who kind of joined us that I'm able to capture. I see many of our viewers are with us on Facebook, which is good. I know I'll capture you. If you're looking via YouTube, I may not be able to catch them, but we'll see. To then send out and say, hey, let's have a book club, see what we want to do, which book would be a great choice. Because there were some books, a lot of them I haven't read myself, and it will be great to kind of engage in that. What I want, we're not final 12 minutes. I want those of you who are watching, if you have any final questions, to pose those questions that we're going to ask our panel, while I also kind of go out and share a few things with our panel, starting off with this. So for me, when I was in school and it was time for Black History Month, I would see this all around the classroom. Photos of great Black people that the teacher deemed were great Black people, that was deemed by publishing companies as the great Black people. I would have Frederick Douglass in, black and white. I guess now we have Clarence Thomas has been deemed one of the great Blacks as well. He gets to be in color, and live in full color. With that, there was a beautiful quote that was shared in Teaching Tolerance by Cassandra Dillard. And it said, for decades, and I'll enlarge it and we'll just kind of share it, just dissect this. And the point, and we'll get to the big point in a moment. The statement reads, for decades now, the material covered during the month of February, Black History Month, has been treated as a sidebar to the American history typically taught in U.S. schools. Posters of respectable Black figures hang in hallways and classrooms. Students read historical facts over the intercom during morning announcements, and teachers often have them read essays about a courageous civil rights activist in class. What I want to know from our panel is, to what extent is this still true in 2021? And what are we doing to revolutionize this moving forward? Or what should educators do to change this or revolutionize this moving forward?
I think history often forgets the contributions and the efforts and the backing and planning of just everyday activists, right? Like, we uphold like heroes and holidays and icons, right? But there was an entire army of people, everyday people. And I think we ought to really begin to highlight those people so that those students can see the greatness in themselves as planners and organizers and activists. It's not one great man who makes a change. It's all the planners and all the activists and all the people that work behind the scenes. And right, it was the people that walked. We all saw Martin Luther King, but what about all the people that walked and did ride shares and, did other jobs and took people in and made lunch and handed them out? Like, these are the things that create a movement. It's not just one person. It's an entire group of people. So I think if we were to truly make a difference, we would have to seamlessly integrate all of this into our regular content. It can't be relegated to February. That's not what it's about. These are all things that happen on a regular basis that took years of planning throughout the year beyond February, right? So we need to begin to really hone in on what movements, what civil rights activism looks like, what everyday activism, like the difference that we're making, that Tam is making in her classroom, right? We ought to be learning about her, you know what I mean? So all the teachers, all of it. And I think if we begin to approach history instead of encapsulated in people, but in all of us, right? We are our ancestors' dreams, right? We are the bearers. We are the people that will take this forward. Then every student can be imbued with that power of activism too, because they realize that it's everyday people like themselves who made this happen, right? We are a movement, not a moment, you know? So.
Yeah, I think I would add to that. I think the kind of new media wave that's coming in, if we teach kids to be citizen journalists and citizen researchers, we are far outdoing, and they learn without us and in spite of us sometimes. So please be clear about this. Like, they are out there on TikTok. Let me tell you where I learned my history from. TikTok. TikTok gives you history in ways that is actually factual. I trust and verify. So I'm doing my verification. But I learned more about history from watching TikToks and scrolling up and down, clickety, 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 than I learned from reading any history book I've ever read in my life. It's because we now have the technology in the 21st century to really, we don't need to tell them what to think. We need to teach them that they are the researchers. They are the journalists. They are the first draft of history. That is what we have to start teaching. I don't think we teach it enough. We have to dismantle this history as this tradition, as this long-standing series of white men writing upon white men about white men's ideas when they look at other people. We gotta dismantle that, because that's not what history is. History is a culture. History is a building of ideas. History is a telling of a story, of many stories. And we cannot fall into the danger of a single one, as Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie says. We have to be there. And we have to teach them to be there on the ground. And that's the really hard part for some teachers, is that they're not prepared to teach these kids the things that they are experiencing and learning right out on the streets, beyond the walls of the classroom. We got to work on that.
I'm going to be scary and say that some of those teachers don't even know these things themselves.
That's what I was going to jump in and say. That is the issue. Kathleen hit the nail on the head. This is why I say to young teachers, y'all have to be reading about history yourselves. Now I am so privileged to be on this panel with people who teach high school, because I think you guys are rock stars and you know about stuff that I don't know about. And I don't feel like an unlearned person on this panel, but I just feel like I'm so impressed by everyone. And I'm like, you guys are so awesome. I just want to go visit your classes. At the same time, I'll tell you, in elementary school, I hate to say it, but it's common to be like not good at stuff. Oh, I hate math. I'm not really good at that. Or I'm not good at this. We do this a lot. I just teach first grade. I just teach kindergarten. We do that to ourselves. This is the language that teachers are using in elementary schools. We have to stop that. In order to change that, we've got to read books and learn. And so something that I tell teachers all the time is, you can't teach people things that wasn't given to you. So when I'm teaching, like, what is everybody else going to be teaching during the Black History Month? You are going to see just one lesson after another about the civil rights movement. My kids have already learned about the civil rights movement. So what am I going to teach? Nothing. I mean, they do give us the shortest month of the year, right? So what are other things where you can express BIPOC joy during that month? So we're going to dive more into different African cultures that gave us unique ways of doing math. I always do a little unit on the Harlem Renaissance, so I can bring in music and we can talk about jazz and we can talk about the different types of music. And like, we use map skills because we talk about that migration and how people moved from the South and they went to the North. Some people even went into France and Great Britain because they were trying to learn how to express themselves in different ways. How do we express ourselves in different ways in third grade, right? So these are all other time periods that we can share with kids that also share Black identity and Black joy in a different way. Of course, we can tie in to things that are going on right now and look at some of our young activists that are out there on the streets right now that have now gone into Congress. Like, I would love to do a little something on Cori Bush, and talk to the kids about what it's like to be an activist and an organizer and now serve your community as a congressperson. These are all things you can do during Black History Month, just with source text from the internet or TikTok, like Dante said.
And your newest congresswoman from Georgia was bullying her. And her staff, the newest congresswoman from Georgia was bullying Cori Bush and her staff. But you're here nor there.
I mean, Tamara, everything you just said. Again, I'm no longer asking if I can come join your class. I'm now demanding that I come join your class. But also to Dante, to your point, I think one of the things, and this doesn't, for me, this is kind of a passion of mine, because I always say, like, part of the reason I don't have kids is because I know I would play favorites. And so, like, when we think about, like, are you a reading or are you a writing instructor? Like, I have no problems playing favorites. I'm a writing instructor first, and I love reading. And my argument to this conversation is, and Dante, you said, like, the danger of, the single story, that TED Talk, and pardon me if I, got the name wrong. I don't think we do enough with storytelling. I think we save storytelling to just be the narrative unit. And we don't think about storytelling as ways into arguments, as evidence in argument. And even in the narrative unit, and there is so much value, and we need to keep the personal narrative. But what about learning how to tell someone else's story, right? How to research for empathy, to tell the story of someone you don't know anything about, to learn about that person and tell that story. And I think we are, I sometimes I love all the conversations out there about disrupt text and right now and everything, because yes, like 1 bajillion% they matter. But like my fear as I love writing first and then I love reading is like, we need to be having like equally as elevated and as like powerful push of like how we're talking about having students craft narratives, one, that are their own. But I think as a whole, the personal narrative seems to be fairly well spread in education, right? But then that idea of like, how are we telling other people's stories and those sorts of activities? So, and fusing narrative across all other modes of writing, so.
Do we have any other comments, guys? We're at 57 minutes in. And so, definitely wanted to, I've had a wonderful time kicking back, and my drink is all gone, is now, this is completely gone. And so I think everybody we've kicked back, we've kind of relaxed a little bit. We've been able to unwind. Very good. We have a weekend finally here. We will be back. We'll do this again. I want to thank you, all of our panelists. Thank you guys so much for just making some time, joining, sharing. This is evergreen content. It'll be up for a long time on YouTube. You can share it as much as you want to. It's not going away. Thanks for everybody who was able to join us, and we will see you back soon. Any final words from anybody? Anything that you want to say to anyone out there?
I guess I would say to all the teachers out there, just, and this is aligned with, I think, with what Tam was talking about, just be curious, be informed, and be brave.
I would say to everybody, thank you, Zach, for really making this possible for us. Like, you don't know how much you give teachers a space to breathe and be and grow in their own thinking and ways. So, like, you need to know that. I'm literally very thankful to you today.
Oh, thank you.
I guess Tam. I think one thing that I've been working on with both students and teachers is finding their voice. So often teachers get caught in just teaching on a daily basis that they forget that this is a calling, it's a mission, it's transformational, it's life-changing, right? This is a craft of people. We can't treat it like it's just any other day. So I think I would tell teachers to remember their voice and use their voice for greater good, right? Like, change your students' lives. Don't just put a book in front of them and walk away. Have that conversation and force yourself to be uncomfortable, right? Step into that realm of productive discomfort and use your voice for good.
I would share, I love that, Kathleen. I would share, it's never too late to start. If some of the things that have been mentioned in this conversation, you think to yourself, oh man, I feel like I could have done better. You know what? All of us on this panel have been there. We've all felt like we could have been better. So, but here we are on a panel, right? So you can start tomorrow being a better teacher for yourself and for your students by just reading and learning and taking in more around you, and then sharing your enthusiasm for what you're learning with your students. So you can start over tomorrow if that's your choice.
All right, guys. Thank you guys so much for joining. It's been a great time, and we'll be back soon. Bye, y'all.